The world is used to crises born from pressure, from invasion, from scarcity, from fear. This one is different. What you are watching unfold around Greenland is not a response, it is a demand, a crisis not triggered by threat, not by provocation, not by necessity, but manufactured deliberately by the United States itself. That single fact changes everything, because when instability is self-created, it stops being strategy. It becomes a stress test, applied not to enemies, but to allies. And the real question is no longer about territory, or minerals, or military access. It is about trust, and how quickly it can evaporate. If this feels surreal to you, good. It should, because moments like this quietly redraw the rules of the world. If you want to understand how power really works now, stay with me. And make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next won't be explained this clearly elsewhere. This is not about Greenland. It's about what kind of system replaces the one we thought was permanent. To understand why this matters, we have to strip away the noise and look at the core of the problem, because this is not a dispute over maps, or borders, or even strategy in the traditional sense. This is a clash between two radically different ideas of power. On one side, the United States is pushing a logic rooted in possession, sovereignty as an object, ownership as proof of dominance. On the other, Denmark, Greenland, and the broader European Union are operating within a modern alliance framework, one built on access, cooperation, and mutual security without transfer of title. This distinction is not semantic, it is structural. Europe is not saying no to America, it is saying no to commodifying sovereignty. And that refusal has been misread dangerously as defiance. What follows from that misunderstanding is escalation without necessity, pressure without purpose, and a diplomatic standoff that never had to exist. Because once power is framed as ownership, compromise becomes surrender. And that framing sets the stage for everything that comes next. To see how flawed that framing is, we need history, not nostalgia, mechanism. For most of the modern era, American power never depended on ownership, it depended on alignment. During the Cold War, the United States defended Western Europe without owning a single capital. No flags planted, no sovereignty transferred, yet deterrence worked. Because power flowed through alliances, through forward deployment, through credibility. The same logic applies today. Look at Taiwan. The United States does not own Taiwan, yet it remains the central force deterring China from crossing a line. Security without sovereignty, deterrence without possession. This is not theoretical. It is the foundation of the post-World War II order. So the idea that defense requires ownership is not bold. It is regressive. It rewinds strategy to a mercantilist instinct, where land equals control, and control replaces trust. That instinct ignores 80 years of evidence, and more dangerously, it disrupts the logic allies depend on to feel safe. Because once ownership becomes the metric, alliances stop being alliances. They become transactions. And that is where the real instability begins. Then the environment changes. Literally, Greenland is no longer frozen silence. It is opening. Ice retreats, sea lanes emerge, resources surface, all because of climate change. And here is the irony. The same administration, questioning the science, is reacting to its consequences. Rare earths, critical minerals, strategic corridors. Suddenly, Greenland looks urgent. This is the first real flashpoint. The moment pressure turns into action. But notice what does not happen. Europe does not shut the door. Denmark does not block cooperation. Greenland does not reject partnership. They signal openness to military access, to economic development, to shared security. What they reject is ownership, and that rejection is misinterpreted as obstruction. This is where the crisis ignites, because instead of negotiating access in a changing climate, the demand hardens into acquisition, a blunt instrument applied to a delicate moment. If you're still following, this is where most people miss the point. So pause, rewind if you need to, because what comes next explains why this never de-escalates on its own. And if this analysis is helping you see the structure beneath the headlines, stay with me. The hidden mechanism is just beginning to surface. What's happening beneath the surface is more revealing than the headlines. This is not a security dispute. It is a systems failure, because the United States is chasing control while Europe is offering function, access without ownership, presence without possession, influence without annexation. That is how modern alliances are designed to work. Europe is willing to give the US what actually matters: military basing, strategic depth, economic cooperation in rare earths, everything except the symbol, and that symbol is the problem, because ownership is not being pursued for deterrence. It is being pursued for performance, for domestic signaling, for the image of dominance. This is the hidden mechanism, a confusion between what looks powerful and what actually works. In alliance systems, leverage comes from integration, from trust, from predictability. Ownership shortcuts all of that, and in doing so, it breaks the system it claims to protect. Once allies realize symbols matter more than substance, they stop offering substance. That is the quiet turning point, because when performance replaces strategy, stability becomes collateral damage. Now the game tightens, and the risks escalate, because Europe is not powerless here. It has a move. If Denmark and Greenland, backed by the European Union, choose to act decisively, they can change the structure of the game overnight, not with words, with presence, by reinforcing the territory, militarily, visibly, legally, and pairing that with a public generous offer, full access, deep cooperation, no ownership. That combination forces a binary outcome. The United States either accepts access without sovereignty or escalates against its own allies. There is no third option. If Washington refuses, escalation would mean confronting a NATO partner, crossing a line that collapses the alliance in real time. That's why this is a bluff, and Europe knows it. The rational expectation is that the US would blink, because actual confrontation would be unthinkable. But the danger isn't the outcome. It's the fact that this game is being played at all. Alliances are not supposed to function like standoffs, and once they do, the damage is already done. And this is where it stops being abstract, where strategy reaches your life, because when alliances fracture, the cost is never paid by diplomats. It's paid by people, by you. When Article 5 becomes uncertain, security stops being automatic. Defense becomes conditional, risk gets repriced. That means higher military spending, less social investment, more anxiety baked into everyday politics. You feel it when energy prices spike, when budgets tighten, when leaders start talking about self-reliance instead of cooperation. This crisis tells Europeans something brutal, that American protection may come with strings, or not come at all. And once that realization settles in, trust doesn't wobble. It breaks. You can't plan a future on a promise you're no longer sure will be kept. That's the human impact of a manufactured crisis. Uncertainty becomes permanent. If this analysis resonates with you, share it, because the people who feel these shifts deserve to understand why they're happening. And stay with me, because the consequences don't stop at Europe's borders. What happens in Greenland does not stay in Greenland. It radiates outward, because alliances are signals, and when one weakens, others recalibrate. Across Asia, partners watch this closely. Across the global south, assumptions shift. Even adversaries take notes. If NATO's Article 5 looks negotiable, then deterrence everywhere looks softer. Not broken, but bendable. that changes behavior. It encourages testing, probing, incremental pressure from Russia in Europe's periphery, from China in contested waters, from every actor waiting to see how far credibility stretches. This is the cascade effect. A manufactured crisis in the Arctic quietly rewrites risk calculations in multiple theaters. And here's the deeper irony. The United States doesn't lose influence because it withdraws. It loses influence because others stop trusting the guarantees it still claims to offer. Power in the modern system is not enforced everywhere at once. It is believed everywhere at once. When belief fades, influence fragments, and the world doesn't collapse into chaos, it reorganizes without you at the center. So now we arrive at the horizon, not prediction, structure. From here, three futures emerge. The first is restraint. Rationality returns. The United States accepts access without ownership. Europe stabilizes the relationship. The alliance survives, damaged but functional. Trust never fully recovers, but collapse is avoided. The second is drift. No resolution, no escalation, just ambiguity. Europe slowly builds independent security capacity. The US remains involved but no longer central. This becomes a looser, colder partnership. The third is fracture. Symbolism wins. Pressure continues. Europe hardens. And the post-war security system finally breaks into competing blocks. None of these futures are chosen by accident. They are produced by incentives. And right now the system rewards disruption more than stability. That is the tragedy of manufactured crises. They don't need to explode to succeed. They only need to change expectations. And once expectations shift, the future quietly locks into place. So let's be clear about what this moment represents. The fight over Greenland was never about land. It was a reveal of how fragile trust really is, how quickly alliances can be reclassified, how easily power can mistake disruption for strength. This was the moment Europe understood something it can't unlearn, that its security cannot rest entirely in American hands anymore. Not because the United States is weak, but because it has become unpredictable. That realization changes everything. Once trust breaks, it doesn't snap back. It hardens into memory, into planning assumptions, into new institutions built quietly, deliberately, without you at the center. This is the Humpty Dumpty moment of the transatlantic order. Not dramatic, not explosive, just irreversible. And here's the final insight. Great powers don't fall when they lose wars. They decline when others stop believing in their word. If you want to understand the next decade of global politics, this is where it begins. If this analysis helped you see the system behind the headlines, subscribe, share it, because the next rupture is already forming, and it will make this one look small.